Thank you for coming to my YouTube station. My name is Dr. Douglas Sadownik, and I'm an author, therapist, and professor of clinical psychology at Antioch University, where I founded the nation's first LGBT specialization in clinical psychology in 2006 and Colors LGBTQ Youth Clinic in 2001. I'm currently teaching process of psychotherapy to a group of very sensitive and gifted students at Antioch University, and they have so far enjoyed these YouTube videos I'm making, and I hope you do too, because some of you are actually not students of mine, at least literally. And I'd so appreciate it if you could smash the like button and also subscribe to the station to receive the videos I'm going to be making. There's a series actually, and also as I attempt to bridge the academic and professional psychological realms with everyday people and their concerns. So it looks like I'm giving a 5-part lecture series to the class. The first today is an introduction to process therapy and the work of existentialist humanist Carl Rogers. We've already gone through some of his material before. We're going to review today. The second, hopefully I'll do in a few days, is a exploration of his 19 principles and how we use them in therapy. The third is a survey of cognitive behavioral therapy. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. And the fourth is a quick summary of psychodynamic thought and how we implement psychodynamic thought. Obviously, it's going to be very, very cursory. I'll give a whole extra series of YouTubes on psychoanalysis. So please subscribe to be alerted when these videos will be posted, and I hope to do them in the next few days, maybe 10 at the latest. Okay, in today's world where there's so much specialization in science and so much actually specialization in psychoanalysis, the field of study that is most rich and that I immerse myself in almost on a daily basis, there's actually a lot of other very, very smart people out there who are not inclined to go read psychoanalytic literature and get into the weeds on that, but it's really good stuff. And you might see a few things here and there on TikTok or on Instagram. Maybe some things that actually more inclined to be like conspiracy theories, self-help, mostly actually fairly pop psychological, but I think it's actually very important that we get more systematic knowledge. It's still shocking to me that almost all of the analyses I see today on the Israel-Gaza situation, hardly any of them are psychological in nature, or let me correct myself, hardly any of them are depth psychological. By depth psychological, I mean the work done by Sigmund Freud and his followers, and C.G. Jung and his followers, to explore the language of the total psyche, which means integrating the unconscious side of human life with the conscious side. Psychoanalysis is an aspect of depth psychology and is more associated with figures like Freud, Anna Freud, Melanie Klein, D.W. Winnicott, Heinz Kohut, and their followers. I'm going to talk to you all about them in future videos. And psychoanalysis is both a theory of knowledge about how to view the world and also a way of doing therapy. And psychoanalysis, maybe you've had some of it, I don't know, involves much more contact with the analyst and much more work in what's called the transference, or the material from early childhood that is often repressed, but is very touched when we come to close relationship of all kinds. Of course, in most relationships, there's too much transference and it's not good for the relationship. But in psychoanalysis, when the client is transferring onto the therapist, that's very good. That becomes the working through and the cure, and how the cure can best take place. But that's very rare that many people do psychoanalysis, although some of my patients do with me. These days, people also refer most likely to psychodynamic therapy. They're working with psychoanalytic principles, but in a more eclectic way and without the intense 3 to 4 day a week contact that you get in psychoanalysis, and perhaps without also the regression that takes place in psychoanalysis. But for today's lecture, we are going back to the basics. We're going to talk about existential humanism and Carl Rogers. I will give you another video, like I said, on cognitive behavioral therapy and how to use it, and then another one on psychodynamic. So who is Carl Rogers? Some of you out there have never heard of him. And what is existential humanism? What the heck is that? Well, the answer is really actually going to take us hours and hours and hours to explain, but suffice it to say that the brand of therapy that was used in North America, especially after World War II, was not existential humanistic. It was very conservative and a traditional form of psychoanalysis. It was top-down, namely the analyst was in charge, and it entailed Freudian interpretations about how the patient might be resisting the therapy or ways in which the mother and father complexes were creating problems in agency and motivation for the client. Not all bad, but not all good. The problem with that type of traditional psychoanalytic therapy was what narrative therapy calls it was too problem saturated. It was a problem saturated story, and the analyst tended to be the expert. So there were many reactions against what we could call the patriarchy at that particular time. The patriarchy, one could say, that captured people in the Eisenhower 1950s, and that was broken apart by the demonstrations in the 60s against the Vietnam War, feminism, anti-racism, the gay liberation movement. Existential humanism is therefore a worldview that bursts out in the socio-political time that is, how could we say, more secular, putting scare quotes around secular. In other words, we are not working with ideology, to the extent that we can avoid ideology, which we can't, but we are not working with anyone or anything in existential humanism that we can't see and that we can't touch. We're working with existence as it unfolds, and the human as that person situates themselves in their existence. Carl Ransom Rogers, January 8th, 1982 to February 4, 1987, was an American psychologist and is considered to be one of the founders of existential humanism, and also known for his person-centered psychotherapy. Rogers' theory of the self is considered humanistic, existential, and phenomenological, insofar it is based directly on the phenomenal field. Rogers' elaboration of his theory is extensive. He wrote 16 books and many more journal articles, and these scholars state that Rogers consistently stood for the empirical evaluation of psychotherapy. He and his followers have demonstrated a humanistic approach to conducting therapy and a scientific approach to evaluating therapy, and how the two are not incompatible. Before I talk to you about Rogers and his 19 propositions, I want to invite everyone in the listening audience, and of course I'm also talking to the students, a few questions. It's a difficult one. What is your system of listening to yourself? Another question. How do you stop and think about what you are thinking, feeling, and behaving? Another question. What is your system of listening to another person? Do you tend to react or talk over or free associate? How do you let the other person know that you are listening? How often do you get distracted by your own thoughts when you are listening to another person? When was the last time you actually quoted a person back to themselves? When was the last time you checked with them to see if they got what you said? How humble are you about what you don't know about the other person? How often do you rely on your thinking more than you would like, as opposed to the vibe or the feeling? Some questions. Why I think this Rogerian way of listening and speaking is important today, especially in the light of the complexity we are all feeling with the Israel-Gaza situation, is so important to be able to actually listen. I'm in class or in therapy, and people can be very reactive about their positions, and for good reasons. People are dying. there is state violence, there is a history of trauma, oppression, victimization on all sides, and a failure of empathy. Empathy here is not some touchy-feeling thing that most people think is what it is, or even compassion. I'm not talking about compassion. Empathy is getting out of your own defensive structure, which is almost next to impossible for most people, unless they've done some therapy or have been really analyzed or tripped out. Getting out of your own defensive structure to hear what the other, whoever that other is saying, but isn't also just saying, but is feeling and sensing. Here it is really helpful to use the tools of psychology. And I think the existential humanists such as Carl Rogers would agree with the psychoanalysts that we are dealing with two realities at all times. There is the outer material reality, which we all assume is the only one, and then there is psychic reality. So when we are making statements about what is happening in the world, so-called objectively, it is also true that there is a psychic valence, one's feelings about the self, one's own childhood trauma, one's own sense of self-functioning or dysfunction. This is the hard part about doing therapy and being in couples situation in such cases where there's differences in politics, but it's also the grandest opportunity to help educate and model for the couple or the family that there are these two different realities and we can not escape both. Perhaps the way humans have historically literalized psychic reality at the expense of their own wholeness and their well-being is actually why there's perhaps even violence in the world. What I'm thinking in my subjectivity is what is happening objectively that is actually patently not true. Perhaps the fate of the world depends on people waking up to the fact that they live in psychic reality as much as material reality. And perhaps this is also what is meant by love, which is empathy as justice, as really listening to yourself so you can listen to the other. Rogers' theory was based on 19 propositions video, so this is really just a teaser for you to listen to the 19 propositions coming in the next video. I'm going to list all of the 19 propositions in the description section, so it would be really great if you could actually look at them for the students, read them, meditate on them, consider them. Thank you all for coming and for listening. Even if you are not my student, I do love you. I love my students, and I would love to hear your feedback. Be well, listen, breathe, practice better listening to yourself and others, because the world needs you now.